Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Intentional Guy. Today we are on air with Dr. Robin Wilson. I'm so happy to have you join our show today. I think you're going to bring a lot of insight to us today. So thank you for being on here.
It is my pleasure. And Michael, feel free to call me Robin. I've been Robin longer than I've been doctor, but feel free to call me Robin.
All right. Well, Robin, I I, I would love to engage in your comments of mindfulness and what that means. I think that will go very well with what the premise of our name is, Intentional Guy. So I just want to dive right into this, see if we could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would love to. I think it's always helpful to start with what mindfulness is, right? Because it's a term we hear batted around a lot, and people think, oh, it's these hour-long meditative states and quiet, and really being mindful is about being present in the moment and without judgment, right? Not judging, not adding labels to the experience or the moment as good or bad, but it just is. And I think for me also, define it as turning off, replaying the past, right? We can get
Right.
stuck ruminating
Yes.
over what we wish we had said or what we wish we had done or how we wished we had been in any given moment or situation. And I don't know about you, but I can also be guilty of like worrying about what's yet to come, right?
Yes.
I am really good about playing out scenarios in my head of, what I think might happen. And so we spend a lot of our brain's energy ruminating over the past or trying to predict what's going to happen in the future, which serves us well in some spaces, but in our everyday life with our friends, our families, on our jobs as leaders, we often miss so much because we're not fully present in the moment and we're living on autopilot. So for
Yes.
me, that's how I kind of box in what mindfulness is all about.
Well, that's great. I read a book a year ago from Stephen Furtick called Crashing the Chatterbox.
Mhm.
I had a lot of bad self-talk going on in my head, and I was like what you said, I was so worried about the future. I wasn't making the right choices in the present, let alone worried about what is gonna happen a year from now or a month from now or even a day from now. And I literally had to live that moment by moment. I started there, but I had to be very, not to be cliche with the show, but I had to be very intentional in wanting to change, and a lot of that was I was letting life lead me. I was just going through life. Wherever it took me, blah, blah, blah. I was getting nowhere.
Yeah.
Once I made a change in that and realized how important the things I pour into me are, I have choices. Everything's a choice. I have a
Mhm.
choice. Uh, but I was sitting there mindless for a while, I think.
Right. Yeah, we get to choose our mental state, right? I love that idea and the word choices. If we don't choose our mental state and our where we are, the world will gladly choose it for us, right? They will gladly overlay it for us. And we recognize as believers, like every new day is a gift, right? It's a
Yeah,
blessing. And how much of that new day do we squander because we're still stuck in yesterday or we're thinking about tomorrow. And here's what we all know: tomorrow's not promised, right? So we
right.
spend ourselves, and scripture teaches us this, right? When I first got introduced to mindfulness, which I realized I probably have known about it, I just wasn't
Right.
practicing it all along, right? It's all in the scripture. We're told, to not be anxious about anything. We're told not to worry about tomorrow because tomorrow has its own worries.
Yes.
Yet we do it, right? Don't we do it all
Right.
the time?
We do. And I think it's we're trying to have control over something that we don't have control over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
tomorrow can change on a dime. All these things it could change on a dime. One thing today different could change what we're already worried about. And I
Yeah.
think for me, what was important was trying to grasp the understanding that they teach it in the 12-step programs,
Mhm.
I can only control the things I can control. Those other
Mhm.
things, worrying about it is not helping the situation.
Right.
Fixating on it is, in fact, it's probably exacerbating the problem
Yeah.
by fixating on it, because now it's keeping me from living presently and doing right now what I need to do. And right now, what I need to do is not worry about what may or may not happen tomorrow,
Mhm.
but what steps I can take right now. And I
Yeah.
felt like I was, I was making decisions off of emotions rather than facts.
Yeah.
So I was reacting to life instead of acting to life.
Right. And so mindfulness is really, the stimulus. Something happens and then there's a response. But being mindful is that space right in between. Right. So something happens, and I don't have to directly go to respond. I can be present in the moment and give myself an opportunity to really pause and reflect. And really, if you think about a picture of just like a sea that looks really calm, and you anchor down, right? And we know who
Right,
our anchor is, right? For me,
right.
that was the beauty of this mindfulness journey and making it a part of my practice, is because I quickly realized it really helped me to deepen my access, my intentional, to use your word, access to God, and to that moment of calm and stillness that He can give me before I respond to the stimulus. If
Yeah,
I would just stop long enough, just a few seconds, to be present in the moment.
yes. And I think for some viewers, what I like them to hear too is sometimes if we don't know what that looks like, or we're having a hard time finding it, that's where someone like you comes into play. That's very helpful. I was 2 years ago. We were in a bad car wreck, and I had PTSD from it, very bad,
Mhm.
and I was on fire. I went. It was after the hurricane happened here. Everything was shut down. You couldn't get in. I mean, doctor's office, hospitals were just taking emergencies, all this stuff. I couldn't sleep for 2 months. I went 2 months with hardly any sleep. So that, how that will do your psyche and stuff.
Mhm.
It was through finding a good counselor
Mhm.
and going to a good counselor that started teaching me ways to cope with
Mm.
life.
Yes.
And a lot of it happened faster than I thought too. I
Mhm.
thought this would have been a long process, but the truth was, one, I think you have to be willing. A lot I know as a counselor, you probably get a lot of people that come in, and a lot of people like to talk, but they don't like to listen, and they don't like to take action and go and
Mhm.
do what needs to be done. They're kind of stuck, and I was choosing to be stuck. When
Mhm.
I went to this person though, I was ready for change.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no shame in getting help from someone who can help you unstuck that, because a lot of it is wrong thinking that
Mhm.
we have and that we've been trained. Because a lot of this, I was a pastor's kid. So I
Oh,
was grown up to worry about what people thought of you.
absolutely.
And I had all these labels that people attached to me, that I attached to me, that I felt God was attaching to me. And you can't live that life.
Yeah.
You can't meet everybody's expectations. So here I was in my 50s, and I never dealt with that. But also some of the things, sometimes we act out and we have these things that are happening because of unresolved trauma in our life and issues. And
Abs
that's what one of the things that happened for me. But
Mhm.
once I was able to take care of that, I, I can't tell you the joy I have, because my mind is clear. And I want to say I'm perfect, but I'm not. But every day when I go into a situation like we're dealing with something in our family right now, and I happen to remind myself, choose to be calm,
Mhm.
choose to respond, not react to what's being done, and take a moment to ask God, what do you need from me right now? What
Yeah.
do I need to do?
That's so powerful. I have a good friend. Actually, I've co-authored a book with a really good friend called Journey Forward. And one of the things he always says, in his daily journal entries is that he chooses to live in joy on purpose every day,
Yes.
right? And so that is so key, getting the supports and helps that we need. um, One of my former staff members gave me a coffee mug that says "I'm fueled by coffee and Jesus," and I've seen T-shirts that say, I have Jesus and a therapist, right?
Yes.
That both of those, that we need all of the tools to help us to be the best versions of ourselves, to be
Right.
fully available, to be the best vessels that we can for God. And a couple of Sundays ago, I preached a sermon entitled "Fix Your Focus." And it
Yeah.
really was around this idea of, so often, as you pointed out, we're focused on the messages from other people. We're focused on who other people have said we are. And because we have all of this noise in our head, it's like the CD-ROMs that we have imprinted in our head from birth, all of
Mhm.
those things. And my co-author does a lot of work around helping people parent intentionally. And he talks about the messages that we put in our kids' heads about who they are that stick, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
and when you're not mindful, your that CD just kicks in and it
Yes.
plays and it sends you all those messages that really are counter to who God says we are. Um,
Yes.
but until we get in there and do that work and take those moments, the thing I've loved about my mindfulness journey is I've learned about this idea of micro practices. That it doesn't, it's not a 10 minute, that literally between Zooms, right before I hopped on here with you, I centered myself and I walked myself through a practice that we do that's just called Just This, where I give myself permission to just be in the moment, to feel my body, to be present, and just think on this, right? Literally those two
Right.
words, so that I can show up in this space and get what it is that I'm supposed to receive from this encounter with Michael.
Yes. I love that. And I think some people. So when I went to counseling, there were some things she taught me, and I was like, "This is weird." I was like, "This is weird," because I wasn't used to it. But then I had to tell myself, "Well, what you're doing isn't working. So are
Mhm,
you open to this?" Right? And I remember one of it, I had to deal with my younger self, and I had to talk because I was dealing with trauma from that, right? But I felt foolish. I'm like, "I don't wanna do that." But I'm gonna tell you, afterwards,
mhm.
it was so powerful.
Yeah.
It was so simple, but so powerful, and I felt foolish at the beginning of starting it, but in the midst of it, while she was coaching me through it, it was amazing. It was amazing what God was able to do with it, and I think in order to be fi you have to be willing and you have to surrender to the process,
Yeah.
and I love the process. I
Yeah.
love I love processes,
Yeah.
and I wanna ask you something. As we're talking, I'm looking here under your name, looking at living each day faithful and unafraid, and I love that because for so many years, I lived in fear.
Mhm.
I lived in fear. No, I really lived in shame
Mhm.
and guilt were my best friends.
Right.
Something I learned as a good pastor's kid. I carried those my whole life.
Mhm.
And I thought I was going into counseling to deal with the trauma of this wreck and the PTSD, which I did. But then we started unraveling what makes me tick. Why am I living this way?
Mhm.
How am I stop being paralyzed by life's journey,
Yeah.
right? So I would love to ask you, as listeners are listening to this,
Mhm.
what are some processes that might help them to become more unafraid, but become
Mhm.
more mindful of their everyday life and moving forward? Because some of them I think are very paralyzed right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things that has helped me besides getting counseling, and I am a counselor, and people always tell you, every counselor needs a good one, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes.
even though I have all of the tools and skills, I'm still blinded by my own experiences to my experiences. So it is really good to be able to go and let someone else walk you through those practices. So I think, getting the help that you need, and it doesn't even have to be something as, I can only imagine the trauma from the accident that you're in. It could be just, right, we've all lived through a collective shared
Yes.
trauma of the last 2 years,
Yes.
and we all had our entire ways of living and being completely upended, and some of us more impacted than others, but we've
Yes.
all been impacted. And I think, even just working through that, like, it was mindfulness that helped me, because I went from working in person to working completely remotely, living and breathing in Zooms, and boundaries got ridiculously blurred, right? I mean,
Right.
I joke with people that it used to be you'd have a 10 o'clock meeting and you'd dare not schedule like the next one until maybe 11:30 if it was supposed to be an hour meeting. So you had time to go refill your coffee,
Right.
grab a potty break, walk to the next location. And we created this space where it was like, nope, oh, look, you finished one meeting at 11. Let's put another one on your calendar at 11, and I
Yep.
found myself feeling fatigued and overwhelmed. And it was giving myself permission to stop, breathe deeply, recenter myself, clear my thoughts, slow down, and be okay with just taking a minute
Yes.
and not clicking start on the next or join on the next meeting or teams until I was kind of decluttered from the previous 60 minutes, had a moment, and moved on. So sometimes it's just that simple. Those mindfulness practices, journaling is another great way. But I'll
Yes.
tell you, my co-author of the book we've written, called Journey Forward. I have a hard time calling myself co-author because I feel like I did the little lift on it. I have a really good friend who, um, is an intentional parent, has done some amazing things, but he daily takes the first 14 minutes of every day to journal.
Mm.
But he doesn't journal about the past, he journals forward.
Oh,
He
wow.
journals from a perspective that the visions that God has given him for his life have already come to pass. And so he writes it as if these things have already come to be. And it's been really cool to watch because some of the things have already come to be, as he does it. But it helps him to stay more positive. It helps him to stay more, intentional about how he moves throughout the rest of his day because he's not on that autopilot, right?
Right.
And in that journaling forward, what we did, he tells this story differently, but since I'm the guest, I get to tell it
Yeah,
my way.
exactly.
So he'd been journaling probably for almost a year, and he started sharing them. He emails them out to friends and family, a small group of us. And so I suggested to him that, wow, these are really powerful. They cause me to think deeply and reflect. You should put these in a book. Others should read this because I think it will help them think about how they frame each day and give them something to reflect on. And so you should put some prompts to go with it, right? The counselor in me wants people to
Right.
have things to do. And he said, I'll tell you what, you pick the journals and you write the prompts, and we'll make a book. And so that's what we did. But really, what I've found, and now he records them in their audio version, and they're amazing. But what I've found with them is it really does help when you're thinking forward. Again, not worrying about what's going to happen, but really projecting forward. So, if God has spoken into your life, Michael, that you're supposed to speak on a national stage, right? Like if he's
Right.
put that in your spirit, then every day when you get up, you journal as if you're in that moment, as if it's
Mm.
already happened. So, giving yourself permission to dream, giving yourself permission to focus on positive things instead of letting your mind continue to ruminate on those negative things of the past.
Yes. And I love that because it's causing you to think positive and be
Mhm.
positive. Because let's be honest, in the last 2 and 3 years here, we have lived in a negative society. We've had a lot
Absolutely.
of negative things happen. We've just life-changing events.
Mhm.
And yeah, I got off Facebook because I was arguing with people on Facebook, but I didn't even know. And I was becoming negative. And that's where honestly God brought the wreck. It really helped me
Mhm.
because it made me recenter
Yeah.
who I was and what do you want out of life?
Yeah.
And I found out I was realizing once I did that self-evaluation and with help that I was not necessarily the person I had strived to be or wanted
Mhm.
to be.
Yeah.
I was being something else because I was not being proactive in that, and I could choose to either be negative or positive. So what I did was I got rid of all the news stations.
Mhm.
I quit watching the news.
Mhm.
Uh, I got off Facebook. The only time I'm on Facebook is to put positive things out there. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Not to I'm not gonna go read through your negative stuff. If you have something negative,
Mhm.
I'm not really gonna look at that, and because I get to choose
Yeah.
what I do, and I know that right now, I don't want that negative in
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah. And when we bring mindfulness into our daily walks, it's you know, pun intended, it's mind blowing, right? Because
right.
it really does. There's so much we do every day on autopilot.
Yes.
And a for example is our eating. We sit down and we eat and we scroll through our phones, we watch television, and we don't take time to savor the flavors, the texture, and even to listen to our bodies when our bodies are telling us, "Hey, you're full. We can stop now." Right? And we live in this supersized world that we just keep going, keep going, keep going because
Yes.
we're doing it mindlessly.
Right.
And, 7 bites ago, your body said, "That's good. I'm good. We can end this." And then we don't. We clean the plate because that's also probably in many of our heads, at least of my
Right.
age, clean your plate,
'Cause we were
right?
taught that. Yeah.
Right, right. And so it's this idea of if I just stop and slow down, put my phone away, turn the TV off, be present with the people I'm with or by myself, and just enjoy the meal. And when give my body a chance to tell my brain, we're full, so that then I don't end up with that feeling that I've had before. Maybe not you, Michael, but of like,
Oh, yes.
oh, I'm stuffed, right? And part of where that comes from is that mindlessness or even our daily drives, right? I've often joked that my car could get home from work by itself, or I get home from work and I'm not even sure how I got there because my
Right.
mind wasn't present. And so one activity I always challenge people to do after I've done a training with them on being more mindful is on your drive home or to work or to the grocery store, where somewhere you frequent often, notice something different. Be intentional, be mindful, and notice something different. And every time I've done that, I'm like, has that always been there? And so it's those kind of things. Or when you're out walking the dog, right? It's easy to go into a mindless state in our day-to-day lives. Like it's so easy. But we're so much more enriched when we slow down, we allow ourselves to be in the moment, and be present. We get so much more out of our relationships with people,
Yeah.
out of our conversations. Wow, I mean, how many relationships with our children or our spouses could be so much better if we actually were mindfully present with them when they were talking with us.
Oh, tremendously, tremendously. And that has been let's talk about the payoff to doing this.
Hmm.
The payoff for it is huge because it's it's gonna bring you satisfaction because you have what you'll find out you'll be able to look and see how productive you are.
Right.
You'll
Yeah.
see the productive because you can't help but see that.
Yeah.
But then you're gonna see that you're for me, so this was my payoff. My payoff was that, but
Hmm.
then I was happier
Hmm.
because I was doing I always felt inadequate to lead my family, to be the leader of my family,
Hmm.
who God called me to be.
Yeah.
But when I took this journey, that's one of the things I wanted to be, was the leader of my family.
Hmm.
So I was mindful in doing that, and then it was amazing. The payoff for that was is the joy I got, but the other payoff is in watching how that choice I made affected my family.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that you talk about leading, because that's been kind of the byproduct of my own mindfulness journey and really embedding these mindfulness practices in my day-to-day walk. Is I've worked with a collaborator, and we've created a program, a leadership training program called the Engaged Leader. Right. And engaged is synonymous for intentional. It's synonymous for
Right,
mindful. It's synonymous for conscious, pick a word, right? We just
right.
being there. And what I realized originally when she approached me, she was thinking corporate business leaders, which is really important. But I think regardless of where you lead, right? Whether it's on your job, if it's in your home, it's
Mhm.
your church, your community. If you're not an engaged leader, you're not an effective leader.
Correct,
And
correct.
so, yeah, so when we talk with leaders, we talk with them about kind of these three buckets to think about this engagement in. And the first one is around our self management, right? You got to do the work on yourself. Where's your identity, right? Is
Yes,
your identity and all that stuff that's replaying on your head of what you're not and who you're not, and that you're not good enough and you're not smart enough. And I've
right.
read something the other day that was really powerful. And it said, we're really good to say I am not enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough. But then when we think about God, who says I am, right? So then if you add those together, that every time I tell myself I'm not smart enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not courageous enough, I'm not healed enough, God's response is I am.
Right.
Right? So he doesn't expect us to be, because he is enough. And so when we really work on ourselves and that identity and are able to self-reflect and take care of our
Yes,
own well-being, then we're able to lead others better.
right.
But we
And
got
I
to do
think
that work first.
yeah, and I think we tend to, I know I tend to. So I'll say in my life, I tend to let the worst moments in my life be what defined me.
Hmm.
And I was like, and that's where this great counseling came into play, because am I choosing to let the worst moments of my life be what define me? Now, I would rather take the worst moments of my life and grow from them,
Hmm.
but my identity is in Christ. And
Yeah.
Christ did not I create me to be a failure.
No.
He created me to be a conqueror.
Right.
And so once I changed that mindset of
Hmm.
my identity and of what how does Christ see me? A great friend of mine asked me that several years ago, and that stuck with me because when I answered the question, I said a horrible person. I couldn't I couldn't see past my own shame and guilt and
Hmm.
failures, right? But now it is I can't believe it's possible that I actually feel this way, that
Yeah.
I'm really this happy,
Yeah.
and that I see how God sees me. I think I see a glimpse of how God
Mhm.
sees me.
Right. Yeah, and that's the beauty of once we replace those thoughts with the other stuff we tend to ruminate on, either past or trying to predict what's coming ahead, when we can really allow ourselves to just stop and hear what it is that, like, God saying, "No, you're amazing. I know you're amazing because I created you." Right? And so there's no
Yeah,
question mark behind that. There's a solid exclamation point. I'm like, I created you, I made you fearful and wonderful. So live like it, right? Live
yes,
every day just like that. And so I really have been trying to work to help leaders understand that self work, which really then leads them into the next space of, if you've got Michael figured out, I've got Robin figured out, best I can. Um, then I can move into thinking about being mindful about my interpersonal relationships.
yes,
So, how do I then allow my best self to show up to coach the people who are on my team at work, or to lead my children, to lead in my ministry? How do I do that with intentionality and not be on autopilot, that I really am listening to people, what they're saying and what they're not saying, right? That's a good thing about having a good counselor because they can hear what you're
Yeah,
not saying too, really well.
exactly. Really well.
Really well, and point those things out, and really being aware of how our lack of mindfulness can hinder our leadership,
Yeah,
right? When we're not really present with people, when they are counting on us, when they're looking to us for support, for direction, for guidance. Um, if we're not aware, we can't do that well.
yes,
And so when we work with leaders, I really try to help them understand that first piece is that self work, but then it really is thinking about what you do intentionally with those you lead. I share a story, if you don't mind, of like a former leader that I worked under who I thought was an amazing, amazing God fearing man. He was an amazing father and husband, someone I deeply respected and admired him as a leader.
right,
And as our team grew, we had a number of younger folks on our team. And he asked me one day, my boss said, I've noticed lots of people are like sending late night emails. What's that about? And he was like, I don't understand why they're up emailing and on their work, doing work at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And I said, well, you started that. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, you're really good about sending emails at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And so people are responding. And he said, but that's not my intent. I said, it's not your intent, but it's the outcome, right? Because he's
right,
on autopilot. And what we all knew about him, he and his wife had 5 daughters. So when he left work, he went home and was fully present with the 6 women in his life. I
right.
think even their dog was a girl. But he was fully present with them. And then
Yeah,
once everyone was tucked away in bed, then he'd hop back on the computer and he'd do emails and do some work, for about an hour before he went to bed. And I said, but what they think you want is that you want responses when these emails are going out. Said
mhm,
that's the difference between being an intentional leader and recognizing the culture you're setting and being on autopilot. And so his mind was blown. And he said, well, I could just set a timer that they don't send until the next morning. There
right.
you go.
There's
And
the
sure
solution.
enough, he did that. And the emails late at night among our team dropped back down. Right. But as leaders, if we're not taking time to pause and reflect and be mindful how every single action, whether it be leading in our homes, leading in our churches, leading in our communities, every single action has impact, even if it's not our intent. And so when you're living mindfully, you're really anchoring into what is going to be the impact of what I do or say.
Yes. And I love that because you have to self-evaluate why you're doing what you're doing, how like you said, other people, relationships.
Mhm.
Relationships to me are so important now.
Yeah.
I thought they were before, but they really weren't.
Mhm.
It was once I went through all this that I realized that I I have friends. And it drives me crazy because one friend's like, "You never like anything on Facebook. You never like anything I say on Facebook." Well, I'm not on Facebook that much. It looks like I am, but I'm not really. But then I'm like, "But are you listening to what they're saying? Because this is a friend who's very close to me, and they want just a little bit of my undivided attention, maybe to
Right.
know that my relationship with them is important. It wasn't about whether I liked something on Facebook or not. It was my friend needed something from me.
Mhm.
And I've learned that now I'm listening more to people
Mm.
because you said it a minute ago. It's what people don't say
Yeah.
that you have to listen to as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And so for me, I have stepped into that role now of seeing how important that is for me.
Yeah.
If I value these relationships, then I need to look at how I'm affecting them and what can
Mhm.
I change different about it.
Mhm.
I thought I was a compassionate, non-judgmental person. after going through this awakening, if you'll call it or whatever,
Yeah.
I found out I was the opposite of that.
Mhm.
And that was a hard pill to swallow, but I had to acknowledge that because that was the only way I could fix it
Yeah.
and change it. And wise guy, I used to work in the prison system. I was a teacher and helped guys before they got out of prison. They had to go through me.
Mhm.
And I remember one day, and it was a very rewarding job, but a very frustrating job too. And I remember one guy came to me. He told me, he said, "When do you think a man's ready for change?" And I said, "Well, when he's hit bottom
Mhm.
and he's, you know, and everything's has collapsed on him." He said, "Well, no, actually." And I was like, "Well, then what?" He said, "A man is ready for change when he's ready and not a moment sooner."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Yes," because it is everything comes back to that. Am I ready for this to happen? I was in my 50s before I had this awakening that I wish I would have had when I was 19 years old, but I didn't. But
Yeah.
I took everything that God gave me and used
Mhm.
those gifts to find out where I was. And I'm so thankful that I was able to discover it
Yeah.
and change it because now everything in my life has changed.
Mhm.
Everything.
Yeah.
And for the better.
Yeah. No, what I have discovered just by integrating small practices into my day-to-day life that I show up a better version of myself for people. I think about, and I always encourage people to think of it this way. Think about your busy self. Like when you are ripping and running from place to place, you have a to-do list that is a mile long. You have work commitments and home commitments and church commitments and community commitments, all those things, and they're all piling up, and you're trying to multitask, right? We live in a
Right.
world that seems to promote this idea of multitasking as if we actually can do it well. Um,
Correct.
we convince ourselves that we can, but think about who you are in those moments. I know for me, I am often less attentive. I am less patient. I am less tolerant. I know who I am when I am busy me. And so by integrating mindfulness into my daily walk, and anchoring it to my faith, what I most days show up as my best me. And
Mhm.
so there's a distinct difference between when best me Robin shows up versus busy me Robin. And so
Right.
I really strive and try to support others and encourage others to get to that space where it's your best me that is showing up every single day and not your busy me.
I love that. I really do. And I really want to encourage my listeners that, if you find yourself just living life, go to restaurants, Robin, and you will see families eating at a table all together, but everyone on their phones.
Absolutely.
Drives me crazy.
Yeah.
And you might be finding yourself in that trap or find yourself just
Mhm.
not being present. And I hope today has helped you guys to reevaluate that in yourself. I want to put, Robin, you have a website, I believe, where they can go and look at. Uh,
Yeah. I would encourage them to hop over to mindful-momentum.com. It's spelled just like that, but put the dash in between, to learn more about mindful momentum, the engaged leader. So I would encourage them to do that. I would also encourage for those that think that this idea of journaling forward might resonate to check out our book Journey Forward, that's
okay,
co-authored by myself and Nathaniel Turner. I think you'll find it witty and reflective all in the same book. There are about 52 different entries, one per week, with some reflective prompts. And you call yourself the intentional guy. Nate often just says he's just a guy. So he's an everyday dad and with a whole bunch of other stuff that he does. But who uses journaling forward as a way to help him live his best life on purpose.
wow,
So,
awesome. Well, I look forward to actually reading some of that as
yeah.
well. So, Robin, thank you so much for being on here today. I'm telling you, I've enjoyed this a lot. I really have. It's been very helpful. So, thank you again for coming on the show today with us. Is there anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
It's been my pleasure to be here. And like I said, I've looked forward to this as I've listened to with other guests. I'm encouraged by your story as well as that idea of being intentional. So I just encourage people to take every day mindful of and being present in the moments they're given.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And to my listeners, until next time, just keep being intentional. We'll talk to you later.